Prior to the revolution of the 1770s, as tensions mounted between the American colonies and England, King George appointed another governor. The governor appointed by King George wrote to the Board of Trade in England, "If you ask an American who is his master, he will tell you he has none, nor any governor but Jesus Christ." Governor Trumbull proclaimed a day of fasting and prayer on April 19th, 1775. God would graciously pour out his Spirit on us to bring us through repentance and an effectual reformation, that our iniquities may not be our ruin, that he may restore, preserve, and secure the liberties of this and all other British American colonies, and make the land of holiness and habitation of righteousness forever. Welcome. This is AllMinucOne, and my name is Bill. Please, if you like this kind of content, hit that like button, share, or subscribe. If you want to watch a live show, guys, I have one every Wednesday over on DLive. TheEnds justify the memes. On DLive specifically, it is found under ends_justify_memes. You may watch replays over on YouTube. The ends justify the memes. And of course, if you would like to support me or my family, you can subscribe to my Subscribestar. If I get people on there, I'll start making very specific content just for you. So, with all that said, let's get to today's topic. And that is this: that the United States is in a dark, dark place. We are on one hand under the forces in control of the government who wish to have globalism, world government, and erode our sovereignties away in our Constitution. And on the other, we have a socialist, communist, fascistic faction that is trying to gain power within that portion of the government. Why is this happening? Well, as Solzhenitsyn had once said, it is because men have forgotten God. And unfortunately, Governor Trumbull here, this was the governor of Connecticut, would be found wrong as far as the idea that God would bless the American nation and that we would make a land, a mountain of holiness, a habitation of righteousness forever. So, with that, I want to talk to you about socialism and the problems of socialism. So I am going to start here with this quote. "And I shall bring into operation throughout all Europe and the whole world this process of selection, which we have carried out through National Socialism in Germany." Let me read that again. "And I shall bring into operation throughout all Europe and the whole world this process of selection, which we have carried out through National Socialism in Germany. The process of dissolution and reordering will run its course in every nation, no matter how old and firmly knit its social system may be. The active section in the nations, the militant Nordic section, will rise again and become the ruling element over the shopkeepers and pacifists, these Puritans and speculators and busybodies. This revolution of ours is the exact counterpart of the French Revolution. And no Jewish God will save the democracies from it." That, my friends, was Adolf Hitler. This is from a book of quotes called The Voice of Destruction. Now, yesterday I read from you Mao's Little Red Book. I want to go over this again and understand that whatever you are calling fascism is socialism. The manner in which it proceeds is always the same. I am sick and tired of the arguments that they are not the same things. They are just done by slightly different means. And I will show you. Here, we have Mao saying, "History shows that wars are divided into two kinds, just and unjust. All wars that are progressive are just. That is, all wars that go toward socialism are just. This is why these so-called anti-fascists in the streets believe that they are just. And all wars that implement progress are unjust. We communists oppose all unjust wars that impede progress. But we do not just oppose progressive just wars. Not only do we communists not oppose just wars, we actively participate in them. As for unjust wars, World War I is an instance in which both sides fought for imperialistic interests. Therefore, the communists of the whole world firmly oppose that war. The way to oppose a war is to do everything possible to prevent it before it breaks out. And once it breaks out, to oppose war with war, to oppose unjust war with just war whenever possible. And as I believe I mentioned yesterday, that is nothing more than doublethink and new speak. It's garbage. It's gibberish. War is war. The only particularly just war that you may argue for is a war of self-defense. War is imposing your will upon another. Let's read this quote. National Socialism, as a matter of principle, must lay claim to the right to force its principles on the whole German nation without consideration of previous federated state boundaries, and to educate in its ideals and concepts, just as the churches do not feel bound and limited by political boundaries. No more does the National Socialist idea feel limited by the individual state territories of our fatherland. The National Socialist doctrine is not the servant of individual federated states, but shall someday become the master of the German nation. It must determine and reorder the life of a people and must therefore imperiously claim the right to pass over state boundaries drawn by the development we have rejected. Excuse me, guys. So, this statement Hitler actually used a little bit before that. The idea that Lincoln was able to go into the South and have war with the South, that the South did not have states' rights. That Ninth Amendment of the Constitution, that the people have the rights that are reserved that are not in the Constitution, and the 10th Amendment, that the states have the rights. What we are seeing when we see Democrats and progressives that are trying to push their agendas across the entire nation is an erosion of sovereignty of individuals and the same fascistic doctrines in which Hitler himself and Mao and Stalin used against their people. Now, I know the comparisons of Donald Trump, the evil orange man, are often to Hitler. That is because you are being gaslit and you have never read anything, and that is why you believe it. You are ignorant, you are blind, you are deaf, you are dumb. You do not know what you speak of. You do not know what you are talking about. If Donald Trump was such a fascist dictator, then there would not be riots, and these people would be either dead or all locked up in jail. Instead, they are repeatedly released, as happened just the other day, and then people go back out and riot, and in one instance, a man who was released from prison, from jail, from temporary containment, was then later a murderer. Another gentleman was caught with a flamethrower and weapons. He was out on a warrant for bail jumping, and they re-released him again. This is not the Republicans doing this. This is the progressive Democrats. And they are doing this in order to terrorize these communities, in order to terrorize the United States as some sort of crazy ultimatum, in order to get the president out, because he is not a fascist dictator. That is why they call him such a thing. If he were a fascist dictator, just like this, just like the quote I read to you from earlier here, he would be trying to spread our beliefs, the beliefs of the United States and his fascism across the country and across the world. And he is not. What he is doing is trying to allow people to be free and to have a free and more open and constitutional society. It is why he is getting away from these global trade deals and these global pacts and these global organizations. It is why he has talked about getting out of the UN. The UN, which is very much communistic. The WHO, which is led by an avowed communist and covered for communistic, fascistic China. So, let's read. This is from de Tocqueville. This is de Tocqueville on socialism. Now, you may know him from Democracy in America. I covered some of his works very early on when I started this channel. And I said I wanted to do this, and I wanted to get to it, and I wanted you to understand that socialism is not any sort of singular form. Neither is communism, neither is fascism. But they all are ducks. They all walk, talk, and quack like ducks. And that duck being totalitarian, economic control, and the oppression and slavery of people. Excuse me. In February 1847, the July monarch of Louis Philippe was overthrown and the Second French Republic established. The new republic believed that the unemployment problem, which was plaguing Paris, could be solved by setting up government work projects. In this fund, because we do this all the time still, because we don't learn from history and your politicians pander to you. Interestingly, I don't have the quote here, but de Tocqueville did say that Americans their liberty would be superseded once the Congress could figure out that they could bribe them with monies. That is, the people. That's exactly what has happened in the United States. That, and we have lost our faith. Continuing here, guaranteeing employment at a certain wage rate for all those who deserve it. On September 12th, the Constitutional Assembly debated the countenance of this arrangement, and de Tocqueville rose to speak against it. So isn't this interesting? This is like a Bernie Sanders proposal. But you know, socialism's never been done right. Never been done right. Ever, ever, ever. So, yes, gentlemen, sooner or later, the question of socialism, which everyone seems to fear, and which no one, up until now, has dared treat of, must be brought into the open. And the Assembly must decide. For our duty bound to clear up this issue, which rely heavily upon the breast of France. I confess that it is not principally because of this that I mount the podium today, and that the question of socialism might finally be settled, that I might know, the National Assembly must know, all of France must know, is the February Revolution of Socialist Revolution or not? It is not my intention here to examine the different systems in which can all be categorized as socialist. This is because, de Tocqueville said this, because he was a bright man. I want only to attempt and uncover those characteristics which are common to all of them and see if the February Revolution can be said to have exhibited those traits. Now, the first characteristic of all socialist ideologies is, I believe, an incessant, vigorous, and extreme appeal to material passions of man. The material passions of man. What does Marx talk about? What did Mao talk about? Got to take care of those people. Got to take care of those material possessions, those material things. Let's have some said. Let's rehabilitate the body, and others that work, even of the hardest kind, must be not only useful, but agreeable. Still others, that man must be paid, not according to his merit, but according to his need. While finally, they have told us here that the object of the February Revolution of socialism is to produce unlimited wealth for all. Doesn't this sound familiar? Did you know that this was written before Karl Marx? Something like 40 or 50 years, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. When did this take place again? 1848. When did Marx write? The 1880s? Guys, Marx is nothing new. He was a useful idiot. He was a useful idiot that you all fall in line with his stupid, backwards philosophy. He's done nothing but enslave people and murder people. A second trait always present is an attack, either direct or indirect, on the principle of private property. That's important. From the first socialist who said 50 years ago that property is the origin of all ills of the world, to the socialist who spoke from the podium and who, less charitable than the first, passing from property to the property holder, exclaimed that property is theft, all socialists, I insist, attack either in a direct or indirect manner private property. What did I speak of yesterday? This is tribalism. There is no private property. You might have you might get to have a staff or some clothes on your back, but everything else as far as food and tents and all that stuff, pottery, it's because you're poor. You have to share. Free markets do not create this. Free markets create wealth. And let me explain this to you very quickly for you naysayers. Wealth is not a pie. It grows, except under socialism. It shrinks in that case. I do not pretend to hold that all those who do so assault it in the frank and brutal manner which one of our colleagues has adopted. But I say that all socialists, by more or less roundabout means, if they do not destroy the principle upon which it is based, transform it, diminish it, obstruct it, limit it, and mold it into something completely foreign to what we have and have been familiar with since the beginning of time as private property. Excited sighs. Listen to that. Since the beginning of time, private property. Marx was backwards. He was a retrograde. This was written 200 years ago nearly, people. You're so foolish. Now a third and final trait, one which in my eyes best describes socialists of all schools and shades, is a profound opposition to personal liberty and a scorn for individual reason, a complete contempt of the individual. They unceasingly attempt to mutilate, to curtail, and to obstruct personal freedom in any and all ways. They hold that the state must not only act as a dictator of society, but must therefore be master of each man. And not only master, but keeper and trainer. Let's go back to Governor Trumbull very quickly. If you ask an American who is his master, he will tell you he has none, nor any governor but Jesus Christ. Nancy Pelosi, an elitist who thinks she is your master, went and got her hair done the other day. The lady at the shop, whatever it was, decided she was going to put out the footage because Nancy Pelosi is a hypocrite and doesn't care about you. She's worth $300 million. She could have had someone come to her house and do her hair. But instead she decided to break the law because rules for me and not for thee. And now she's saying it's a setup and she got her lawyer involved. Please tell me that she cares about you in any way, shape, or form. That any of those people, any of those progressives, any of those leftists, any of those globalists care about you as an individual. De Tocqueville understood. They hold the state as your master. They hold the state must not only act as the dictator of society, but must further be master of each man, and not only master, but keeper and trainer. For fear of allowing him to err, the state must place itself forever by his side, above him, around him, to better to guide him, to maintain him, in a word, to confine him. They call, in fact, it for the forfeiture to the greater or lesser degree of all human liberty. Guess what fascism does, people? The same freaking thing. Read Mussolini's Doctrines of Fascism. You can do it in an afternoon. It's about 50 pages. To the point where I, to attempt to sum up what socialism is, I would say that it was simply a new system of serfdom. I have not entertained into a discussion of the details of the system. I have not indicated what socialism is by pointing out its universal characteristics. They suffice to allow an understanding of it. Everyone, you might find them. You will be sure to find socialism. Everywhere you might find them, you will be sure to find socialism. And everywhere socialism is, these characteristics are. Is socialism, gentlemen, as so many have told us, the continuation, the legitimate contemplation, and perfecting of the French Revolution? Hitler. This revolution of ours is the exact counterpart of the French Revolution. And no Jewish God will save you from the democracy, save the democracies from it. People say Hitler was a Christian. He was not. He was an occultist, and I will tell you this. Fascism allowed Christianity or religious service as a way to bring up the people, but they thought that the state was supposed to be the moral and spiritual center of the people. So you guys should go read this yourself. This is thelibertyfund.org. The Tocqueville's Criticism of Socialism, 1848. You can find it online. Please do so. Read the whole thing. As usual, for the sake of time, I'm not going to. I'm going to move on to something else. And that is this. This is from the von Mises Institute, vonmises.org. Why Nazism was socialism and why socialism is totalitarian. So he says, very quickly, my purpose today is to make two main points to show why Nazi Germany was a socialist state, not a capitalist one. To show why socialism, understood as an economic system based on government ownership of the means of production, positively requires a totalitarian dictatorship. So it says National Socialist Workers' Party, talks about von Mises identifying them as socialists not because of the name, but because of their actions. It says, nevertheless, apart from von Mises and his readers particularly, no one thinks of Nazi Germany as a socialist state. Why? Because the communists fooled you. The communists lied to you about what it was and what it did and what it is. Read Günter Riemann's Vampire Economy. He lived it. Read the Doctrines of Fascism. Read what Hitler wrote. Do not tell me they were a capitalist free market. They were not. They were socialist. It was a different form of socialism. Very much so, if you read the Doctrines of Fascism, Mussolini explains that he came out of socialism to develop essentially a new socialism. What they rejected was that materialism alone was the important part of perpetuating mankind. They decided that there was a spiritual or attitudinal aspect of that. I would agree. I would concur on both those points. I don't concur with the totalitarian nature of it. I don't concur with the state having control, and I don't concur with the state running the economic system or giving handouts to people. If you want to give a handout to people, there's a proper way to do that, and that is with your own money by your own hand. So the basis of the claim that Nazi Germany was a capitalist was the fact that most industries in Nazi Germany appeared to be left in private hands. This was not true, though. What von Mises identified was that private ownership of the means of production existed in only name. Under the Nazis, and that of actual substance of ownership of the means of production resided in the German government. For it was the German government and not the normal private owners that exercised all of the substantive power of ownership. It is not the normal private owners decided what was to be produced, in what quantity, by what method, and to whom it was to be distributed. as well as what prices would be charged and what wages would be paid, and what dividends or other incomes and normal private ownership would be permitted to receive. The position of the alleged private owners, Mises showed, was reduced essentially to that of government pensioners. That's right. They were on the government dole. They had to be. And Günter Riemann describes in The Vampire Economy, because of this, in order for a business to stay open, to get proper materials for the products that they needed to build, they would have to bribe individuals within the government. It creates a system of corruption, much like we have here in the United States. That is because slowly, since Woodrow Wilson, and especially FDR, the United States has drifted into a soft fascism. But that soft fascism is with, Social Security, Medicare, the government takeover of our healthcare system in general, all kinds of regulatory practices, rent seeking by big corporations. Look at big tech and how they censor. The government has no control over that. Why? Well, because they censor the progressive, they do not censor the progressive cry. They censor the liberty cry. They censor the constitutionalists. They censor the people that want freedom. And then you have people like Jerry Nadler, who's on Fleckus Talks, says, hey, what do you think about the riots, Mr. Nadler? Oh, that's a myth. Okay. Gaslight me some more, buddy. You freaking piece of, you know what? I mean, come on. Come on. This is how dumb the people in the federal government who are in front of the cameras, who are supposedly making the laws, because I can guarantee you they're not. It's mostly aides. It's a bunch of people behind the scenes that are bureaucrats that are appointed to positions. That's what really goes on. But these people in front of the camera that you elect, they're just bringing you socialism. They're just bringing you fascism. It's been going on for 100 years in the United States. So let's get down here. It says, but what specifically established de facto socialism in Nazi Germany? Was it was the introduction of price and wage controls in 1936. These were imposed in response to the inflation of the money supply carried out by the regime from the first time of its coming to power in the early 1933. Now, we have the same thing going on in the United States we have for a very long time. We didn't need this in the past because we had a gold standard. The Nazi regime inflated the money supply as a means of financing the vast increase in government spending required by its programs of public works, subsidies, and rearmament. What is quantitative easing? What does our federal government do every year? They take on more debt or they print more money. This impoverishes you. The price and wage controls were imposed in response to the rise in prices that began to result from inflation. This is why we have minimum wage. It doesn't work, people. You're chasing your tail. And you're pricing out low-skilled workers so they can't get a job. And then what happens is that those low-skilled workers, now they don't have a job, guess what happens? They get on the government dole. Now they get welfare. They get food stamps. They get whatever they get subsidized by the taxpayer. And then that ever-increasing socialism comes to bear its fruit in the United States. And then you have kids with college debt, with stupid degrees that have no skills, who've been taught by nothing but Marxist professors out in the streets, rioting, looting, burning things down, and murdering people. And then you get a Democratic Party saying, just give us more power. Just give us more power and we'll make it all stop. Meanwhile, you reelect the businessman Donald Trump, who's hold the highest office in the land, can never come back again after 4 years. I mean, take a chance on it, I would suggest. I certainly don't think he's Hitler. I mean, that'd be one giant scam. This guy that has been basically business and has been obstructed every step of the way by business as usual, globalists and progressives within our federal government. These ideas, people, these things are taught to our children. They're in our schools. They're infiltrating everything and everywhere. You should be very alarmed if you like freedom. The effect of combination of inflation and price controls is shortages. That is a situation in which the quantity of good people attempt to buy exceed the quantities available for sale. Shortages in turn result in economic chaos. It's not only that the consumer who shows up show up in stores early in the day are in a position to buy up all the stocks and goods and leave customers who arrive later with nothing. So he goes on to talk about how it creates big lines. It says the face of the combination of price controls and shortages, the effect of a decrease in the supply of an item is not as it would be in a free market, to raise its price and increase its profitability, therefore operating to stop the decrease in supply. That's right. This is a natural function of markets. When something is scarce, the first rule of economics, scarcity, that would be a universal law, people. People talk about economics like it's just all math. No, it's mostly theory and principles. But beyond theory, there are actually laws of economics because we live in an actual, material reality. There is objective truth. There's only so much gold in the world. There's only so much water. Now, fortunately, we have a kind of self-sustaining planet when it comes to that. But there's only so many materials, and there's only so much labor that we can use to mine those materials or gather them together, or so many brains to invent materials like plastics. There's only so much. That is the principle of scarcity. And then it takes, like I said, labor. And scarcity always applies to individual labor. And that is also what capital is your individual labor. You trade your labor for exchange of goods and services, or money, which makes it easier to exchange of goods and services. It's not that hard. It really isn't. I can dismantle Marxism in 5 seconds. It's so simple. Price controls prohibits the rise in the prices and thus the increase in profitability. At the same time, the shortages caused by price controls prevent increases in supply from reducing price and profitability. When there is a shortage, the effect of an increase in supply is merely a reduction in the severity of the shortage. So it goes on. I'm going to jump down. He talks about, we had gas shortages in the 70s. He talks about how this created the Nazis went to create this socialist system. So the combination of price controls with this set of controls constitutes the de facto socialism of economic system. For it means that the government then exercises all of the substantive power of ownership. This is why you want a free market money supply like a gold standard and not a fiat money supply that the government itself creates. When the government prints and creates money, you lose out. It's like a hidden tax, as Ron Paul would often, and probably still does, often say. This was the socialism instituted by the Nazis, and Mises called it socialism on the German or Nazi pattern, in contrast to the more obvious socialism of the Soviets, which he calls socialism on the Russian or Bolshevik pattern. Of course, socialism does not end the chaos caused by the destruction of a price system. It perpetuates it. Interestingly enough, if you do study economics, you'll see that in Russia, they had no way to price anything. They had to use the free markets of the West and the US to price things, because you don't know what the value of something is unless there's a free market, because the value of something is only what a person is willing to give for it. And the more scarce it is, the more someone is willing to give for it. And that might mean that not everyone gets one. I promise you, though, you start putting price controls on things and you do wage controls, it doesn't get any better. Only those people who are ultra rich and everyone else just becomes poor. And those people who are ultra rich, of course, are the corrupt people within our government or the governments at the time. So he says it perpetuates it, talking about the chaos of price control system. And if it is introduced without prior existence of price controls, its effect is to inaugurate that very chaos. This is because socialism is not actually a positive economic system. That's why I said it shrinks the pie, literally. It is merely the negation of capitalism and its price system. As such, the essential nature of socialism is one and the same as the economic chaos resulting from the destruction of the price system by price and wage controls. It says, I want to point out that Bolshevik-style socialism, imposition of a system of production quotas with incentives everywhere to exceed the quotas, is a sure formula for universal shortages, just as existed under all-around wage and price controls. So again, different means, same ends. Now we're going to jump down here. Now think this is the same article, by the way. Now think the fundamental fact that explains the all-around reign of terror found under socialism is the incredible dilemma in which the socialist states place itself in relation to the masses of the citizens. On one hand, it assures full responsibility for the individual's economic well-being. Russian and Bolshevik-style socialism openly avows this responsibility. This is the main source of its popular appeal. Basically saying, we'll take care of you. We're your mommy and daddy. You don't have to worry about anything. Okay, well, mommy and daddy's going to keep you home for the rest of your life. You're going to be that young man or woman living in your parents' basement, never, ever successful. You're just a failure. You're just a failure. You're a freaking loser. And, you know, it's fine. Mommy and daddy, they're going to let you suckle. You know, instead of growing up and being an adult and going out and making your way in life and doing something and contributing to society and making the world a better place. Nope, that's not what socialism allows you to do. It lets you suckle on mommy and daddy until, you know, you're ready to die or they die, and then you just inherit their house maybe, but probably not, because the government will just take it away. And then what? Well, you get to move to a smaller place that the government subsidizes for you. That's what happens. You foolish, foolish people. On the other hand, in all of the ways one can imagine, a socialist state makes an unbelievable botch of the job. It makes an individual's life a nightmare. Every day of his life, a citizen of a socialist state must spend time in endless waiting lines. For him, the problems Americans experience and the gas line shortages of the 1970s are normal. Only he does not experience them in relation to gas lines. He does not own a car, for he has no hope of ever owning a car. But in relation to simple items of clothing and vegetables and even bread. Even worse, he is frequently forced to work at a job that is not of his choice, and which he therefore must certainly hate. As the old Russian Soviet joke goes, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. So again, I want you guys to really go back and look at this. It's quite a long article, so I can't go through the whole thing. Let's see here, though. I believe he gets into, yes, black markets, and this is what I want to highlight here. Because of the privacy and secrecy in which many black market transactions can be conducted, think of how you would get illegal drugs, right? Or buy a weapon in a non-legal form, or, I don't know, import some sort of exotic animal or whatever it is. I don't know. How about the sex trafficking trade? You think those people get drug protections? I don't mean the people that are, legal protections, government protections. Like the people that are being trafficked in secrecy are, one, slaves to the people that are trafficking them, and two, have no protection from the government unless the government finds out. This is what black markets do. It says the government must make anyone contemplating a black market transaction fearful that the other part might turn out to be a police agent, or the other party might turn out to be a police agent trying to entrap him. The government must make people fearful, even of the long-time associates, even of their friends and relatives, lest even they turn out to be informers. Solzhenitsyn talked about this, that everyone snitched on everyone, and everyone put up with the lie. What do you think corporate America is doing? It's putting up with the lie. What do you think all the people that are Democratic supporters doing right now? All the people that are supporting BLM, and I don't mean the sentiment. That, like, let's get away from that, people. I'm not even talking about police brutality. We can talk about that. That's part of this. Police brutality comes about because of this socialistic system, because the system that creates black markets. But you're too stupid to understand this. You haven't figured it out. You're just emoting because, someone took you, like Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, and said, well, they can't operate outside that box, so I'm just going to feed them sweet, sweet emotions. They'll never think about anything. Your mother and father send you off to jail because you're just trying to get some bread and a little black market off on the side, right? informers everywhere. You have no idea. Man, God help us. I hope Trump wins in a landslide. I hope these people are kicked out of office. I hope America has a revitalization, but I'm getting very angry and very pessimistic about it. Very much so. It says, finally, in order to obtain convictions, the government must place the decision about innocence or guilt in the case of black market transactions in the hands of an administrative tribunal or its police agents on the spot. It cannot rely on jury trials because it is unlikely that many juries can be found willing to bring in guilty verdicts in cases in which a man might have to go to jail for several years for the crime of selling a few pounds of meat or a pair of shoes above the ceiling prices. That's above those price controls. So there's a great book called 40 Centuries of Wage and Price Controls written in the 70s. Absolutely dismantles and destroys every socialistic argument, every communistic argument about wage and price controls. Goes all the way back to ancient Egypt and follows up until today. And it shows how every time in every case that there is a black market created by this, and that the wage and price controls actually create more problems, the stagnation, the starvation, whatever else. You can find it on vonmises.org, actually. It's a little book. It's a couple hundred pages, maybe 120 pages, maybe 200 pages. It's not a terrible read. If it's sort of boring to you, read it chapter by chapter here and there. Understand, learn, people, grow. In sum, therefore, the requirements merely of enforcing price control regulations is the adoption of essential features of a totalitarian state, namely the establishment of a category of economic crimes in which the peaceful pursuit of material self-interest is treated as a criminal offense, and the establishment of the totalitarian police apparatus replete with spies and informers and the power of arbitrary arrest and imprisonment. So, and then it says, the enforcement of price controls requires the government similar to that of Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Russia, in which practically anyone might turn out to be a police spy, in which all secret police exist, have the power to arrest and imprison people. Do you understand how this works? Guess what? Happened in the United States. It still happens. Been happening since the 70s. It's called the drug war. It's why we have gangs in the United States and gang violence. Much of the crime in the United States and the violence is from gangs. And again, this continues, but I'm not going to stay with this any longer. I'm going to move on. What I want you to understand is that this, as has been stated before, is the road to serfdom. This is the road to poverty. This is the road to destroying anything and everything in which you know as freedom. And I can tell you that there are people that live in Eastern Europe that know all about this, because they don't want to return to this way. They have so many friends from the former Soviet bloc. So many. They moved here as soon as they could. It is a nightmare, people. And this is the stuff that Yuri Bezmenov was talking about. You do not want this in your country. This is why India was held back and so impoverished for so long, because they embraced communism. Much of South America, the same thing. They've embraced socialism. Go over the Academic Agent. He does a great episode, I believe, on Uruguay and how the people asked for socialism and how it absolutely destroyed their free market society. In fact, I might play a little bit of that in a day or so. We'll see. So let's jump to here. This is from Tertullian. He was a 2nd and early 3rd century Christian theologian. And this is how you help people. And this is how you stay away from these dangerous ideas. De Tocqueville was a Christian. Montesquieu, one of the great classical liberals, was a Christian. Edmund Burke was a Christian. They believed in God. They believed in God, and they held that a belief in God kept the society from becoming horrible and wretched. Unlike the French Revolution, which rejected God and went only with reason. And it wasn't reason that they had at all. It was all passion. It was all their deep, dark shadow and their resentment that just destroyed. What was it? 150,000 people or something died during that reign of terror during the French Revolution, the Jacobins. We're going to talk more about that soon. We're going to talk about some of the roots of this stuff. We're going to talk about maybe some conspiracy theory stuff. It ain't theory, people. It was known, and people talk about it, and they talk about it openly. It's fact. But you don't understand, and you want to ignore. You want to be deaf, dumb, and blind. So let's read here. However, However it be in that respect, with the sacred words, we nourish our faith, we animate our hope, we make our confidence more steadfast, and no less by inculcations to God's precepts, we confirm good habits. In the same place, also, exhortations are made, rebukes, and sacred censures are administrated. For with a great gravity is the work of judging carried on among us, as befits those who feel assured that they are in the sight of God. And you have the most noble example of judgment to come when anyone has sinned so grievously as to require his severance from us in prayer. In the congregation and in all sacred intercourse, the tried men of our elders preside over us. The tried men of our... Guys, I'm just being ultra dyslexic today. Forgive me. The tried men of our elders preside over us, obtaining that honor, not by purchase, but by established character. There is no buying and selling any sort of things of God. Though we may have our treasure chest, it is not made up of purchase money, as of a religion that has its price. On the monthly day, if he likes, each puts a small donation, but only if it be his pleasure, and only if he be able. For there is no compulsion. All is voluntary. These gifts are, as it were, piety's deposit fund. For they are not taken thence, and spent on feast and drinking bouts and eating houses, but to support and bury poor people. What an honorable, godly thing to do. To supply the wants of boys and girls destitute of means and parents. That would be the orphans, people who cannot do for themselves. And of old persons confined now to the house because they can't go out and provide for themselves. There's a duty, a godly, spiritual duty to do this for people that need help, but only by the voluntary nature, if you please, but you should please as a good person. Such too as have suffered shipwrecks. It can happen. You don't have a job. You have no clothes. You have nothing. And if there happens to be any in the mines or banished to the islands, often as they did to prisoners, John of Patmos, who wrote Revelations, by the way, or shut up in the prisons for nothing but their fidelity to the cause of God's church. See, the church takes care of its in-group of the church, but there is other charity of those who can't help themselves. But as Paul said, those who do not work do not eat. He wasn't talking about those who weren't capable. He's talking about those who are and who refuse, like those freaking idiots out in the streets right now creating riots. They become the nurslings of their confession. But it is mainly the deeds of love so noble that led many to put a brand upon us. See, as they say, how they love one another, for themselves are animated by mutual hatred. He's talking about people mocking the Christians. How they are ready even to die for one another, for they themselves were sooner put to death. And they are wroth with us too, because we call each other brethren, for no other reason, as I think, that because among themselves names of consternation, essentially, are assumed in mere pretense of affection. Guys, it's not happening today. Not today, for whatever reason. In any case, I could go on. This is Tertullian Uh, just lovely words from a 2nd and 3rd century Christian. Let's look at this. Back to Tocqueville. He says, upon my arrival in the United States, the religious aspects of the country was the first thing that struck my attention. And the longer I stayed there, the more I perceived the great political consequences resulting from this new state of things to which I was unaccustomed. In France, I had almost always seen the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom marching in opposite directions. Listen to this, because he's talking about the Jacobins. He's talking about the French Revolution and that they wanted to shun and cast off religion. And again, de Tocqueville was a godly man, or at least he believed. I don't know how he conducted his daily life, but he believed in God. He believed in Christ. And he believed that you needed that. But in America, I found they were intimately united, and that they reigned in common over the same country. Says he further wrote, the Americans combined the notions of Christianity and liberty so intimately in their minds that it is impossible to make them conceive the one without the other. And with them, this conviction does not spring from that barren traditionality of faith, traditionary faith, which seems to vegetate in the soul rather than to live, meaning this idea that you're a passive Christian, that you actually live it. They brought with them a form of Christianity which cannot better be described than by styling it a democratic and republican religion. Actually, what he's talking about here are the Catholics, so these are excerpts. But I think you get the point. I think you understand. Whereas men like Marx hated God, and Mao, and Stalin, and the many other murderous people that have lived throughout history, especially the 20th century, the American spirit was founded on the precepts of Christian liberty, Enlightenment ideas, and classical liberalism. Nazis were socialist. Fascists are socialist. Communists are socialist. And they, every single one of them, have done nothing but horror and evil. It's funny how horrible the Nazis were because they killed a lot of Jews and gypsies and some Christians. If you weren't aware, they killed Christians and cripples. But their numbers are nowhere near what communism has done to the world. Somewhere between 250 million poor souls died because of this evil, evil ideology. I want you to meditate on that, folks. Thank you for watching. Please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. This has been AllMinucOne. My name is Bill, and I wish you all well.